Okay, thank you for joining me. I know it's the session before lunch and the sugar cravings are kicking in. Don't be too distracted by your sweets though. So I want to start the session by doing a couple of things. First of all, try to put your phones face down, put them away, don't let them distract you. And secondly, I'd like you to take a couple of deep breaths in and out and just pause and count as you do that, and think about how it makes you feel. So I'm Hannah. I am a cybersecurity specialist, a brand strategist, and most importantly, a woman in tech. And I like to think that I didn't end up here by accident, but actually thinking back, I think chance did have something to do with it. I fell into the world of cybersecurity in pursuit of any job when I graduated in English literature back in 2010. And I was lucky enough to join a business where the women seriously outnumbered the men. And I soon realized in this industry that I had an advantage by being a woman. I was disarming men at conferences. I'm sure many of you can relate to the experience where, it wasn't difficult to test out my growing subject matter knowledge on security with unsuspecting middle-aged white men. Put women in that equation and they don't know what to do with us. That means, though, that we get to define it for them. So there's something there about making the most of your assets. And as women, we have an obligation to be ambassadors and advocates for our girls in this sector. So I rejoined the cybersecurity industry when I relocated to Barcelona a couple of years ago. And I did this because I knew that this was the space where I had purpose. And I realized I needed more purpose after I watched my colleagues run around like headless chickens trying to launch TV ad campaigns in the marketing team at Barclays, as if it was life or death. And let's face it, launching a TV ad at a certain time on a certain day isn't going to change the world. Who watches the ad breaks now anyway? But empowering our girls to adopt smart behaviours and habits online will. So it wasn't quite as simple as that, though. I found myself in Barcelona, in Catalonia, in an office full of men, and it was difficult to be heard. So I soon realised that I wasn't going to be able to do what I loved in that environment, and I went on to launch Exhale. So Exhale uses mindful approaches to enable people to exist, survive and thrive in a highly connected world, which might sound a little bit different, and that's why I started off asking you to breathe, and we're going to come back to that as well. So today I'm going to, ignore that, I'll come back to that. I'm going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about being empowered, I'm going to talk about choice, and I'm going to talk about balance. And share some insights on where we're at the moment with this conversation with women in tech and women in cybersecurity, and explore some techniques at quite a high level to engage our girls with this mission. And I hope that you'll feel like you can take those away and have the chance to make an impact yourselves as well. So now I'm going to move on to this fantastic story, which is about the US Girl Scouts. So by September this year, US Girl Scouts as young as 5 will have the opportunity to earn badges in cybersecurity. I think there's about 27 in total. This is in collaboration with Palo Alto Networks, a huge security company in the States, and it's exactly the kind of thing that we need a lot more of. But the reality is that at the moment only 11% of women globally hold roles in cybersecurity. So what can we do to combine these stories to encourage a shift in that gender gap? So back to those three things, and this is the first one, empowerment. So I want to think about how we can encourage girls to adopt smart habits and behaviours when they're actually interacting with tech before they even have a complete vocabulary, and they're very, very accomplished with their iPads and your phones, their mum and dad's phones. And through these. So a couple of weeks ago, I had the chance to attend 4 Years From Now and Mobile World Congress, where there were tons of fantastic sessions supporting the Women for Tech initiative. So I was very, very excited to be there, and there were fantastic comments from all of the speakers, but this was one of them that stuck out for me. This was from Lisa Wang, the founder of SheWorks, which is known as the global collective of women entrepreneurs. And she said, next time you talk to a small girl, don't tell her how pretty she is. Ask her what she's building and what she's reading. And this made me think about how we can empower girls as early as possible with ideas that give them control over their online presence, and control over how they interact with others online and in real life, and ultimately control over their career choices with tech and cyber in mind. So children as young as 2 and 3 years old are highly influenced and engaged with online content. They're advancing and they're developing much quicker as a result, but at the same time they're also exposed to risks that have the same power to influence their perceptions and their imaginations. A lot of unsuitable and inappropriate malicious content is actually disguised as kids' content on channels that we think are relatively safe, like YouTube. And you know, let's face it, how many times have we just wanted a young child, whether it's our son, daughter, niece or nephew, to be quiet for a minute, and we've handed them our phones or our tablets because that's what engages them and it works, but we don't have the awareness that we perhaps need to make sure that they're not exposed to the wrong kinds of things, and that they're using that exposure to tech in a good way. So, moving on. So, with back one step. So, what I also want to add, though, to that point is that apps that encourage kids to create code, colour in, are by no means the type of things that we want to limit access to, because they drive creativity and innovation, which is what we're all about. But what we want to do is encourage our girls in particular to be building and reading and creating things that they're so proud of that they actually want to share with us, and that gives us as adults and parents the opportunity to create a dialogue with them about their online behaviours in a way that feels supportive and encouraging and not like an interrogation. So we really want them to be in a position where they feel empowered to lead that conversation, and encourage them to show us what they're doing and how they're doing it, rather than having to feel like we're prying on their behaviour online. So with the stat about the Girl Scouts and Lisa's thought-provoking statement in mind, this is the right kind of message that we want to be giving our girls. You know, we want them to be openly proud about what they're building, what they're developing, so that they're willing to share it, we can intervene, and they can actually take the lead on their online safety and security. So this was another quote that stuck out for me at Mobile World Congress this year from Amiram Applebaum, the chairman of the Israel Innovation Authority. He talked about promoting understanding why something has failed and moving on. And as part of what he was talking about, he really challenged the kinds of behaviours that we should be teaching our children to encourage them to innovate. I think as adults and parents, you know, how do we stop ourselves or resist the temptation to instill the mindset that achieving 100% and achieving A grades is what it's all about and is for everyone? I think most of us know, despite the kind of rigid Western traditional education system that we've been through, that we actually come out the other end and find we don't necessarily fit the mould. So this brings me back to one thing that we can do to support our girls, and that is to actually allow them to feel frustrated and allow them to fix things, allow them to problem solve, because these are the types of things that are not necessarily being taught at the moment as part of their curriculum, and these enable them to innovate. One thing, I mean, we live in an age now where tech really gives us this sense of instant gratification. You know, if something doesn't load within a couple of milliseconds, we curse it, we get so frustrated, and our shoulders end up round our ears, and we start taking short, sharp breaths. And so that tells us that actually it's not really good for our health, and it's also not great for encouraging original ideas and for fixing things. So I thought this was particularly poignant, even though it is from a man, and we are about women today, but they're not all bad. So on that note, you've all been really good, actually. Nobody's looked at their phones. So just take another couple of deep breaths in and out if you can, and just think about how just taking those breaths makes you feel. And that kind of leads me on to the thinking behind exhale. So taking deep breaths tells our bodies that we're safe, and therefore it's a wonderful way of coping with the stresses that life throws at us every day, and is something that we actually don't pause and do enough. So with that in mind, I want to think about how our children are actually coping with the stresses that come from being exposed to tech throughout their youth and their development. There was a report in the Telegraph recently that described how children's interaction with social media, the transition from primary school to secondary school, is something that they're really, really struggling to cope with, and is probably something that as adults and parents we are not very aware of and not very involved in. It moves from quite a kind of sheltered and protective interaction with social media at primary school, the age of around 11, 12, to a popularity contest in the playground that's all about likes and follows and comments. And this is where the insecurities come in, right? So what I want to remind us is that before they reach that point of entering into this Insta-based popularity contest, we are actually instilling the message, particularly with our girls who are potentially more vulnerable in that way, that you are enough. This ties in with the mindful approaches that I'm bringing into this subject matter. So when we're in the process of empowering our girls to show us what they're developing, what they're building, and how tech's actually enriching their lives, don't forget that we often compare our minds to browsers with hundreds of tabs open, and we just really want to shut down so that we can catch a break, but you know, we're always running at 100 miles an hour. So part of our responsibility as women, as parents as well, is to be those advocates and ambassadors for our girls, is to remind them that they are enough and prolong their childhood and divert the attention from the infinity scroll, divert the attention from the validation that they seek through likes and follows, etc. We're also, in doing that, preparing them to enter a workplace where it is still predicted that it's going to take around 200 years to fully close the gender gap. And you know, it's important that they understand that they are enough when they are likely to end up in environments where they do have to fight to be heard. So it's crucial, and this is where balance comes in. So on that note, though, I do want to do a sort of little aside away from the slides. So this whole thing is daunting, and there are lots of different dimensions to it. I had to really control myself and be as concise as possible with preparing my thoughts for today. And down the line, we sometimes feel that the energy and excitement to impact this change is just too much for us to take on, and that starts to get replaced with doubt and defeat, that we just can't tackle it, we can't do it. But what we must remember is we're not alone. Yes, it is something that is way too big for one woman or man to tackle alone, but our values are more aligned than ever, and this topic is more visible than ever, and today is a fantastic example of that. So that is where our excitement and our enthusiasm returns to keep influencing and encouraging our girls to continue that conversation and collectively have an impact. So this quote is quite an interesting one. It's by a lady called Rosalind Mejia, or Mejia. My Spanish pronunciation's not very good. And it's the best moments of my life don't make it to social media. And I expect it's something that you've all probably seen and may have even shared online. So the irony, right? I read something recently about the habits and behaviours around social and actually switching off, and I agreed totally with all of the sentiments in there and how important it is. But I had this unfightable urge to share this article on social. So, you know, the conflict is there, and it's difficult to actually explain sometimes. So, what this actually reminds us as well is that it's good security practice to avoid sharing every single detail of your whereabouts online. But it also reminds us that privacy is much more than a policy. Privacy gives us another dimension, and it's in those moments when we're switching off that actually the best kinds of human interactions happen. And that's the closest that we can probably get to being present and being in the moment. So on that note, being human is the new disruptive. And humans have a tendency to fail, but failing enables us to innovate. So with control, this is something that I hear a lot when I'm transitioning between yoga poses. And this is actually about choice, and is about owning the conversation. So equipping our girls to own that conversation, disarm those with narrow minds, and pave the way actually for women in tech. So it's far superior to dispel those insecurities that come about from not having enough likes, not having enough follows, being told or not told that you're pretty, by reminding yourself that you own it, and we need to set our girls on a path that informs them that they can own that conversation and own their interactions and their online presence. Control also needs to be front of mind when we think about security. We need to preserve our privacy through control, and it comes into double checking those default security settings that many of us ignore. So by empowering our girls to lead this conversation, show us what they're building, what they're creating, and when they've taken control of situations online that may have potentially put them at risk, we are influencing much smarter habits much earlier on in their development. So I did tell you and warn you that there were lots of different dimensions to this, and that's why it's important to breathe, because it can be a bit overwhelming. So what we're actually doing is taking control by giving control to our girls. A strong understanding of what constitutes a strong online reputation is crucial, especially when you come to launching a career. We all have an online reputation by default, just by being online. And we've only just started to think about that in the last sort of 5 to 10 years or so. And let's face it, you know, if we're going to talk about likes and follows as well, you know, they're not going to switch off, and there are hacks that they understand. I mean, a lot of the kids of today can build a global brand for themselves. They achieve global reach and incredible followship purely through being natives. And those are the things that are actually highly transferable into the world of work. So this is how we want to start to turn it around and empower them to be using tech in the best way possible. So starting that conversation early and encouraging them to engage with their online community in a way that's positive, in a way that doesn't put them at risk, and in a way that contributes some good is part of our responsibility at this point. The thing is it's actually much easier to start a conversation and start a dialogue with our kids and the next generation about their ambitions than it is to get them to tell us the ins and outs of their Instagram activity and their community and who they're engaging with there. So this is where balance really comes in. With control, we achieve balance. And we create more equilibrium for women in cybersecurity. So to start to close, I want to mention this quote, which I couldn't resist finding a cool image of a unicorn as well, that was from Elena Santos, who's leading the global diversity program at Unilever, and really inspired me when I was at Mobile World Congress. So she said, today's startups are tomorrow's unicorns, and this comes back to the points about innovation, using tech in the right way, instilling habits that, you know, enable us to cope and enable us to fix things and innovate. And my point with using this quote is that pursuing a career in tech as a girl is as awesome as being a unicorn. Unicorns can do anything they want. And who doesn't love them right now? I mean, they're everywhere. So I'm a woman in tech. I'm not a techie, and sadly I'm not a unicorn. But I'm here because my purpose is this, and I'm bringing a different skill set, a different perspective, and a softer skill set to a world that is traditionally a man's world. But our manels, as they are commonly known, which is a panel of men, which we don't have today, are looking to us to seek the balance that we need. So that's a fantastic thing. And awareness and communication, which tend to be a skill set that we perhaps have better than they do, are things that are still very much lacking in the cybersecurity arena. The debate there hasn't changed really in the last 10 years that I've been involved in it, in the times that I've moved away from it as well and come back. The conversations that are being had are still very much the same. So if we want our girls to experience real reward, this is one way that they can achieve it. We want to do that by encouraging them at times and allowing them to feel frustrated, allow them to discover purpose, and know that they're in control, know how to also counteract that frustration and take those deep breaths when you need to. And in doing that, they're actually pursuing so much more than a career. They're pursuing a career that is about empowerment, choice, and balance. So on that note, I will pause for any questions and come back to finish.
Somebody has any question? There, thank you.
Hello. First of all, thank you for the talk. Really interesting. How we as men can help minorities get empowered, get their choice, get their balance in a man's world, as you mentioned.
Thank you for your question. Can I take this out of here? So, brilliant question. And today, yes, there's definitely a focus on women and girls in this talk, but I am by no means limiting it to our girls, and I think boys as well experience lots and lots of different emotions and are exposed to different risks, and they probably also are even worse at expressing it and sharing it than girls are as young children. So this is something that we need to definitely pay attention to. When I've talked throughout this, I've talked about parents quite a lot, and that's where obviously men come into it as well. And just encouraging this dialogue. This is what I want to explore, and this is what I'm kind of building a project around at the moment, about using different techniques that are perhaps more mindful and about switching off, but just instilling things that are, equal in terms of genders, encouraging building and developing and just using apps and tech in the best way possible, and keeping that dialogue really open. And it definitely is tricky, and I'm actually open to hearing what everyone else thinks in terms of their insights and their experience with engaging their children or younger people in their lives with these kind of things. How best are they learning? But one thing that I want to really push, and that applies to everybody, is encouraging them to take the lead, so positioning it in a way that empowers them to actually show you what they're doing, because let's face it, kids think we don't know anything, right? We're already getting out of touch, and I don't even think I'm that old, but it's about turning it around and making them really feel like they are leading the conversation, and in doing that they are also leading the way, I hope, for all of us in tech and cyber. But we do need to address the gender gap in the cyber industry and balance out those kind of skills that are needed to make a change that traditionally we haven't managed to achieve yet. I hope that helps. Happy to chat more with you later.
Anyone else? Question for Hannah? No? Okay, yes.
So I think that the big problem why right now there is so many men in tech and so few women are schools. Do you think that right now schools are aware about it? Because I see that many parents are that they start thinking about that, about the girls, right? Mm-hmm. But there's still a lot of parents not really aware about this. And eventually, girls don't see the choices, right? And what do you think about this?
For sure. This is something that it plays a big part in again, what I'm hoping to build and launch, and what I alluded to when I mentioned the quote from the chairman of the Israel Innovation Authority about the education system that we're all so used to, that is really becoming outdated now and is far too rigid, and kind of instills this mindset that, it's bad to fail, you must be aiming for top grades 100%, and doesn't really expose young people to the different opportunities that are out there. And part of it is, I think, intercepting their education from a very much younger age than perhaps we have been so far. That's why I mentioned the kind of 2 and 3 year olds even, who are so familiar with technology, so that they can ensure that they're using it in a good way, but we don't come into the conversation too late. And we definitely need to do more to get into the education system and get this on the curriculum. And I think it's something that teachers, education authorities all over the world probably struggle to figure out how to engage kids with it. So this is where, I really want to try something a little bit different by using these approaches, which at first might seem completely unrelated, but you can actually always find a link. So for sure, I totally agree with you, and I think it's a case of just making a collective effort. As soon as this kind of light bulb moment happens for us, let's all keep pushing on together. I mean, when I talked about the kind of doubts and defeat that comes in when you're kind of trying to push on to make this change, it's actually all about strength and knowing that together all we've got to do is just keep banging the same drum, and collectively we will make a change. But I know that people that I'm speaking to now, there is definitely an appetite for it. It just needs to be recognised at a bit of a higher level to make sure that our children do have the wider choices. I hope that helps.
Any question more? Okay, so you can continue.
So, to kind of close then, so just to reiterate, Exhale uses mindful approaches to enable people to exist, survive and thrive in a highly connected world. And today has been about checking in with ourselves on where we're at with this conversation with our girls, what we need to do next. Checking in on different ways of empowering them with the right kind of mindsets that they develop in the best way possible in the highly connected world that we're in now. Exploring different ways to intervene, and that's by creating dialogues and getting them to lead on not only their security and their safety online, but just how they're behaving in that space as in general. And these are the things that empower us as women and girls and as a whole to move forward. So I do want to pause though and think about what International Women's Day means to each of us in every sense, not just in terms of equality in the workplace. That's not what it's solely about. In the UK tomorrow, it's Mother's Day. So I thought this was the perfect opportunity to put a snapshot of me and my mum. I don't know how old I was then, but obviously quite small. And just to take a moment to think about the strong women who have put us here, and about how important it is to be able to cope, and that we need support in order to be able to cope with the various frustrations that life throws at us in each and every way. So, thank you, Mum. Thank you, Women Tech Makers. Thank you to the sponsors today, and thank you for listening, and breathe.